Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathleen Simler. I'm the manager of communications for AARP Michigan, and I'll be your host for our program today. So I want to welcome all of you to our Ask the Doc series. Every month through May of this year, we're bringing new programming on health topics that are important to people as they age. Last month, we talked about weight loss injections and intermittent fasting, and next month, we're going to be talking about how to navigate the heavy burden or the heavy task of caring for a loved one. So that's what's up next. I hope you'll consider joining us for that. We're going to put during the show, we'll put some registration links in our chat for you if you are interested in upcoming programming for our Ask the Doc series. And of course, later this year, we're going to be doing a special standalone series on diabetes. So stay tuned for that. But best of all, every program AARP brings to you here is free. And today, especially, we are going to be talking about something that has garnered a lot of interest among our members and the public. So we're here to talk about what we call the hottest subject of them all, sex. Something that gets better with age, just like a fine wine or a classic song or a well-seasoned cast iron pot. So now I know that some of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, are we really going to talk about this? And the answer is yes, because the truth is sex doesn't stop at age 50, 60, or even 90. In fact, some people say it gets better with age. With fewer distractions, more confidence that comes with years, and hopefully no more sneaking around because you have a house full of kids. Hopefully those days are past you. So we're going to talk about everything from keeping the spark alive to navigating changes that happen with our bodies as we age. And yes, we're going to talk about the big O. And by O, I mean optimism. Optimism that your sex life does not have to be over just because you're getting older. And we might even talk about the actual big O too. So we'll see where our conversation goes. But before we dive into things, I want to take a moment to set the tone for our conversation. Our intent is that this program is going to be a welcoming, open, and empowering space where everyone's experiences and questions are valued and respected. So whether you're in a relationship or you're single, dating, or you're just here out of curiosity and are just going to quietly sit back and listen, that's fine. We're all in this together. And I just want to remind you that the chances are if you have a question, others are probably wondering the same thing. So you don't need to be shy. You can put your question in our comment box. It is, private. It'll only have your first name. So your curiosity might just be something that someone else needs to hear too. So, and by you asking it, they can feel seen and supported as well. So to take us through this interesting conversation, we have with us today Jason Powell, a licensed marriage and family therapist who is also certified through the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. In his work, Jason focuses on marriage and couples therapy, specifically centered on infidelity repair, communication issues, couples in crisis, and relationships that are on the brink. He's been featured in Forbes, The Knot, which is an online site for people who are getting married, and other leading media outlets offering his insights into relationships, sex, and communication. We've asked him to kick things off with us today with his knowledge on sex and aging specifically. But then we're going to turn things over to you, our audience. We've reserved the majority of our time today for your questions. So this is intentionally an interactive event. So again, if at any point you have something to say or want to ask a question, just put it in the chat and we'll do our best to get to everyone's questions. So, and now I think we're ready to get started. It's my privilege to turn things over to Jason Powell. Jason?
Thank you, Kathleen. It's so great to be here. This is a topic that I love. And so I really appreciate everyone making the time to come on. I just do want to reiterate that we are all in this together. And whether you're in a sexual relationship or whether you're lamenting the loss of one or just kind of curious, I'm glad that you're here. And we're going to talk through some of these things at a high level, and then we'll kind of zoom down. I do want to give a trigger warning, right? I know that talking about sex and eroticism can be very nuanced, and people have very complex relationships with sex. So if something comes up through someone's questions or through something that we're talking about that feels triggering, please practice really good self-care. Turn off your screen, get up, walk around, get some fresh air, practice good self-care. And I do acknowledge, right, this is a topic as a certified sex therapist. I'm talking about this 6, 8 hours a day. And I know it can be difficult for someone who doesn't live in that world to talk about this. So ask your questions as generally as you want to, and I'm happy to sort of dive into that. So thanks for being here. What I want to do is just kind of briefly talk a little bit about what are the trends, what does the research tell us about older adults and the kind of sex that they're having. We'll talk about that, sort of create a lay of the landscape, and then we'll dive in, we'll answer your questions, and we'll go wherever you want to go. So let's just start with some general knowledge about the trends and what the research tells us. So the last research that we have from 2023 let us know that about 72% of adults who are age 65 to 80 believe that sex is really important as part of a holistic romantic relationship. So in that age group, people are saying, yes, this is important and this is something we want more access to. Erectile dysfunction affects about 50% of men from age 40 to 70. And we'll talk more about how that plays out in relationships and the impact that can have. But we know that that's a really serious concern that a lot of people have, whether it's the man himself, the penis owner, or it can be the partner, right? And for women, we know that the vagina changes over time. So it becomes more narrow, it shortens, which changes the vascular structure. So we have issues of dryness, painful penetration, sometimes vaginismus, those kinds of things in the perimenopause and postmenopause phases. And one of the factors that I love to mention here, and I think Kathleen alluded to it, is, sexual activity in older adults is highly correlated to satisfaction in life, lower incidences of depression, anxiety, that sort of thing. We know that people just feel happier, they have better self-esteem, and they just show up in the world a little bit lighter when they are sexually active, right? So another big change, and you might have heard about this has been in the news a lot, but the rise in STIs, or sexually transmitted infections, for older adults is just skyrocketing. We can talk about why, but to give you an example, I think from 2010 to 2023, cases of chlamydia tripled in folks that are 65 to 80. Gonorrhea increased by sixfold, and syphilis by 10 times. And to compare that to the demographic that is a little bit younger, during the COVID years, STIs rose about 2 to 3%. And then in the 65 to 80 demographic, they rose about 30%. And if you're asking, well, gosh, why would that be? It's because older adults are now more active. They're having more sex. They feel better. There's a longer life expectancy. And we can kind of talk about the societal changes, but there's also less taboo around older adults having sex, and it's just more welcome. So the sexual activity is up. And unfortunately, what we're finding is that a lot of older adults say, well, gosh, if we can't get pregnant, who needs condoms? And then we have this epidemic of STIs that are rising. So we can talk about how to mitigate some of that. So I also mentioned the societal shifts in this. And this is one of the things that I'm personally most excited about, because for too long, there's been so much stigma and taboo around older adults and having sex. And while that's still there, we're really seeing that change. So unfortunately, a lot of older adults are still uncomfortable talking about sex because of those stigmas. And we really want to change that and sort of shatter that and knock that down. But we're seeing some great improvement in that. Online dating is up, for older adults, and people are out, they're meeting people, they're having fun, they're going on dates, which is fantastic. And then we're seeing more media portrayals of older adults in sexual context, which is fantastic. We just need a lot more of that. So that's sort of the overview at a really high level. Here are just some tips that I would share with you at a more personal level as you think about, what does this mean for me? When I talk to folks about sex and aging in session, one of the things I talk about is, the change in expectation, right? So sex is going to look different as we age, right? And so maybe it's less about orgasm, maybe it's less about penetrative sex, and maybe it's more about pleasure, maybe it's more about intimacy, maybe it's more about connectivity, and those kinds of things. So it changes, but not for the worse. And one of the statistics that I love is that when we look at the research, we find that sex tends to decrease in the 55 and older population, but people's satisfaction dramatically increases. So they say we have less sex, but we really enjoy it more when we do. So that's a really exciting sort of way to view, maybe less sex, but feeling more embodied, feeling more present, and that sort of thing. So one of the tools that I would give you on this front when you're thinking about the change in expectations, and one of the things I do with people is to build what we call a sexual ethic, right? And this is just you kind of sitting down and thinking about with your coffee or with your tea, what is my why? What's the point of sex for me now? Is it pleasure? Is it orgasm? Is it to be set apart, from the world with my partner? Is it about self-pleasure? And starting to define that. What is the role of orgasm and all that? So we can talk more about that. But I think that's important, just kind of this change in expectations and how we view sex kind of going forward. And then just some overall, health concerns. What we know overwhelmingly is that our general health is greatly predictive of our sexual health, right? So our diet, our exercise patterns, our community, do we feel isolated? How is our faith relationship? Where are we there? How is our mental health overall? And typically what we find is the healthier that we feel sort of across the board, the more sex we're having, the better sex we're having. And so that's something that's really, really important. And a couple of just new bits of research that I wanted to throw in, because this is new within the last year or so. We're getting a lot of good research around self-pleasure or masturbation for women as a way to create more vascular connections and connectivity to help with some of the dryness and the pain associated with penetrative sex. So we know that masturbation helps a lot with perimenopause, menopause, and post-menopause symptoms. We also know that only about 1 in 10 women report self-pleasure as part of their eroticism. So there's a gap there, and we want to understand that a little bit more. And then the last sort of bullet that I'll give you, the last sort of tidbit is, seniors and older adults enjoy kink, right? And so there's this taboo and the stigma of, well, gosh, no one's having that kind of sex. And it's just not true. In the 60 plus demographic, BDSM is the top fantasy that people name, followed by age play. And then I think shortly after that is group sex. But the idea that older adults don't want to engage in fantasy and that sort of thing is just not supported by the research. So that's kind of an overview. That's kind of the trends of what we're seeing in the general population, who's having sex, the rise in STIs, the societal changes, which we're really excited about. And then at a more personal level, changing your expectations, considering your overall health, practicing safe sex, and those kinds of things, and then embracing the idea of kink or fetish if that's part of your eroticism. And we can talk more about any of those topics. So I'll pull up there. Thanks for letting me kind of dump all that on you. But I thought it'd be helpful to just sort of put a little bit of a foundation down. So happy to answer questions, happy to hear thoughts. You tell me what feels helpful.
Thank you so much, Jason. I have to tell you that that it's probably because of how I was raised, but this conversation is making my cheeks hurt. I think I'm like smiling too hard. And, I probably like a lot of people from my generation, we didn't really talk about this very openly. And so it's interesting. Even hearing the word kink was like, oh, I felt like I bit into a lemon candy. Anyway, so I did tell people that your names wouldn't appear, but your names are in the chat as you entered it. So I hope that doesn't inhibit anybody. You can always say, well, a friend of mine wants to know, if you want to go that route. But so we do have lots of questions that are popping up, but I'm going to start with one that came in earlier. We got this question ahead of time. And it's, I just don't have an interest in sex anymore, but I want to be physically intimate. Is that enough for men?
That's such a good question. It's such a human question. It's probably, I think I was telling Kathleen sort of before the show, if I get 30 emails in a week, 20 of them are about what we would consider desire discrepancy, or, I've just lost desire. And what does that mean? And I think the answer to that is it depends on the man, right? And it depends on, and this is where the conversation gets into, people often focus on what kind of sex do you want to have? What kind of sexual positions or toys or all these things? But I think it's the wrong starting point. And where I encourage people to start with is, how do you want to feel? Right. So if you're talking to your partner and you feel less desire, so how do you want to feel? Well, I really want to feel, maybe I want to feel in control, or maybe I want to feel like you're in control, or maybe I want to feel really sort of carnal, or maybe I want to feel whatever it is. And once you know that, well, that opens up doors to, well, gosh, we could make that happen in a variety of ways, as opposed to, I just want to have more penetrative sex. Well, gosh, I'm not there. And so I would tell, and this is particularly true with women, it can be true across the board, but I tell every woman that I talk to who comes with this, you do not want to have sex that you don't want to have, which I know might sound obvious to people, but they did some research before on what they would call consensual non-desirous sex. So my partner's not having sex that's not consensual, but I really don't want to do it. And it has very damaging long-term effects on the brain. And there are women across the country and across the world who have been having sex from an obligatory place, or, well, I better do this or not. And it's just not healthy and it's not good. And it's really damaging to your psyche. And so the conversation is, hey, if my arousal changes, how do we still find eroticism? And I often ask people to think about what we would call an erotic constellation. Right. So you imagine kind of looking up into the sky and you see all these stars. We want to do that with our eroticism, right? If the only way that we can connect is through penetrative sex, we're in trouble, because the reality is vaginas and penises are just not that reliable, particularly as we get older, right? Bodies just are not that reliable. Arousal is not that reliable, right? And so what we really want to do is focus on what are the ways that we feel connected. And maybe that's taking a shower together. Maybe that's reading erotica in bed naked together. Maybe that is buying some new massage oil. Maybe that's can be all kinds of different things, but we really want to have this erotic constellation with ways that we can connect when I feel less desirous, for penetrative sex. Because one of the questions I would ask you if we were talking one-on-one would be, do you have desire for any kind of sex? Is it I don't want partnered sex? Do I enjoy solo sex, masturbation? Is this something reflective of the relationship? Maybe ask yourself what kind of sex would be worth having. Right. And we're getting into, is there a way that I want to feel that I don't feel, particularly with women, right? Sex, the idea that women's pleasure matters is such a new phenomenon. It's so ridiculous. But if you look historically, it's been about men and what they want, and women's pleasure has been an afterthought. And so for many people, they say, well, gosh, why would I want to have sex? Why would I go do this performative thing that I don't really enjoy? And desire shrinks. And so sometimes what we find is, well, gosh, if I could find it more pleasurable, and if I felt like my pleasure was prioritized, well, that's different. Well, maybe now I'd want to engage. So I know that's sort of a lot, but it's such a human question. My gosh, you're not alone. Everybody wants to know the same thing. And I hope some of those things will help you.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. And I appreciate the suggestions you offered up, different ways of approaching intimacy. So we do have a question from our viewing audience right now. It's, when I have an intense orgasm, sometimes I feel an organ on my lower right side move. It feels like the size of my liver. Is this safe?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's something that you want to get looked at. That could be, ovarian cysts, endometriosis, pelvic inflammatory disease, uterine issues. So there's a lot there. And so what I would say is you definitely want to talk to a doctor, and you definitely want to tell them what's going on and just make sure there's nothing else there. So I would probably not be having sex until I got that checked out, just to be overly sure and to practice an abundance of caution. But really good question. And again, something that women often ask about, these different pains, and I'm experiencing these things. And the default is always to go and get checked out first. But those are some of the things that can typically be.
That's interesting, because I would imagine a lot of women have never had orgasms, even, that are out there and don't know what's right and what's wrong. So talking to your doctor is a good advice. All right, so we have a question from Pat. What is the erectile dysfunction rate for 70 and older?
It gets up to about 70%. What I don't like about the research is that we don't do a good job of delineating between erectile dysfunction and erectile dissatisfaction, which are two different things. So, erectile dysfunction would mean that my penis is not hard enough for penetration. Erectile dissatisfaction would mean, well, I can probably still penetrate, but not in a way that feels good. My penis isn't like it was when I was 21. It's not rock hard. It's hard enough, but I don't love how it feels, and I don't like how it looks, or whatever that is. And that would be erectile dissatisfaction. We tend to sort of clump all that together. So I think what you would find is the 70% probably includes a lot of erectile dissatisfaction, not just dysfunction, if that makes sense. But the rates get up to about 70% from the research that we have.
And I want to add on to that question, because this came in earlier too. With women who experience this in their relationships with their male partners, sometimes they interpret that as their lack of attractiveness to their partner. Is that necessarily the case?
No. And that's one of the hardest things, right? We get into people say, well, gosh, my partner, if they're not initiating, they must not want me. And this is where communication becomes so important, because my experience has been that would be probably single digits the case in percentage wise. I mean, typically what it is I don't trust my own body. I don't feel good about my own body. I don't feel desirous. I don't feel desirable. And that could be for any number of reasons. And so then partners begin to experience rejection and that sort of thing. And so this is where the conversations become really important around. And one of the questions that I encourage people to ask is more of a general question to your partner of, where are you right now just in terms of desire? Not towards me or not towards any particular sexual act, but are you feeling desirous? And someone might say, well, my grandkids or my kids are going through this really difficult time. My mind is anywhere but sex. Or it could be, I've been really killing it at the gym, since January. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling really sexy. I'm feeling really turned on. So checking in with each other and checking in with yourself about how desirous I am and sort of what's happening for me erotically is a really important part of that, so that you can communicate that to your partner.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so George is telling us that he's had intercourse. He has not had intercourse in over a year. His wife does have some dryness and has seen her gynecologist about this. And they have a problem with intimacy.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a question, but I don't know if you want to comment or give him any advice.
Yeah, I think I would encourage you, right? People go very long periods of time without having intercourse, and people then say, well, gosh, it's been so long. How would it be really re-engage? And I would encourage you to talk to your wife about where are we in terms of, desire and that sort of thing. And if she's experiencing dryness, which is incredibly common and such a part of women's sexuality through aging and that sort of thing, that's where we get back to kind of that erotic constellation and that sort of thing. And I would ask, what are some of the ways that you might feel pleasure? What are some of the ways that you might want to engage? Because intercourse is a way, not the way, to experience sex and sexuality together. And so I'd encourage you to have a conversation around what feels pleasurable. If your vagina is drier and you're not experiencing that, how do you experience that? And what would that be? Maybe I give you a massage. Maybe I wash your hair in the shower. Maybe we just kiss, really romantically, or whatever that is. So I'd encourage you to have a conversation with her about where is her desire and what does she find pleasurable with the dryness.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this question is from Pat, who wants to know if the rate of sexually transmitted diseases is higher because older adults choose not to use condoms.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. And they believe that once we can't get pregnant, we're out of the clear. And that's what we find when they do research and they talk to people about why they're not using condoms and that sort of thing. And they say, well, gosh, we're not going to get pregnant. Who cares? And so that is by far, without question, the number one reason. Yes.
Christine is asking what your thoughts are about scheduling intimacy.
I love this question because scheduled intimacy gets the worst rap. And I always tell people, who's having sex? People that schedule it. And the way that I would tweak it is, I don't know how sexy it is. If somebody says, do you want to have sex on Tuesdays at 7? Well, gosh, probably not. Cause maybe I ate Mexican food for lunch and I don't really feel good, or, maybe I'm just feeling kind of crummy or whatever it is. What I would encourage you to do is instead to create scheduled spontaneity. And what I mean by that is Tuesdays at 7 o'clock, we come together for an erotic encounter. And it could be penetrative sex. It could be oral sex. We could take a shower together. We could, have first date questions and sort of get to know each other in a way that's really playful and flirty. So the idea is we have time that is carved out, that is deliberate and intentional, but it's not so prescriptive as we say we want to have sex in that way, because then it makes consent difficult and it can create the things that penises and vagina hate, which is expectation and obligation. If you want to kill eroticism, sprinkle in expectation, an obligation, and you will kill any sort of desire or arousal. So the scheduled intimacy, absolutely, 100%. It's one of the most powerful things that people can use.
All right, so we have a question from Loretta. She is saying that her husband has a large penis, so sex is more painful now as she's in her 60s. How can she stay lubricated to enjoy penetrative sex? She's upset because her husband enjoys sex, as does she, but their sex life has changed.
Yeah. Great question. And again, this is one of those really human kind of questions. And what I can do is provide, there are some really great lubricants, natural lubricants that have come out. The market has really changed. And we have some great options from a lubricant perspective. So we can sort of talk about that, and I can give the hosts information and links to some of that that can be shared. But there are lubricants that can do that. Another thing that I would suggest to you is what a lot of people like to do when they begin to feel that pain is there's a lot of sex furniture and tools that people can use, like Liberator and some of these things that people go on, and they're basically just chairs, benches, and things that are designed to take the pressure off of you and to help you get into positions where maybe the size of the penis isn't impactful and doesn't allow the depth of penetration. And so I would say the twofold, explore the new kind of litany of options that we have from a lubricant perspective, because it's fantastic, really healthy kinds of things that we just didn't have even 10 years ago. And then maybe look at what are some positions and ways that I can put my body that limit the depth of the penetration so I don't feel that as much. So I hope that helps.
Is there something similar for people that have some physical ailments, arthritis, things like that? I mean, is there equipment to help, or just suggestions or things they can read?
I think when it comes to arthritis, I mean, that's one of the things that so many of us deal with in different ways. And I think that's where you get back into the lifestyle, to the extent you can control that, right? With exercise and doing some of those things. And there's a part of it that just, besides the, some of the medications that are available and the lifestyle, that's really what we know. And that's the best that we can do for now, unfortunately.
Okay. So I have a question from earlier. Somebody sent in, how can I bring excitement back into my relationship? You talked about kink. Do you want to give people like any more ideas?
Yeah. So, and I saw someone in the chat, it looked like they had asked for the acronym to be explained, and that's fair. So I don't know if that was about BDSM, but if it is, the BDSM, the B is bondage, the D is discipline and dominance kind of split. The S is submission, and the S is also the sadism and masochism, right? So this is really when we think about, bondage and that sort of thing, that's typically what we mean when we mean BDSM. And so back to the question of, how do we sort of spice that up and how do we do that? I think this gets back to driving the questions around how you want to feel. And if someone says, I really want to feel in control, then you say, well, how do you experience that in the sex that we're having now? And if they say, well, gosh, a little bit here, a little bit there, but maybe not as much as I would like, maybe then you talk about introducing, some sort of kink, or maybe you use some sort of what we would call power exchange, where maybe your partner is then the one that's more in control in a way that feels, consensual to you, and navigating that. So one of the things that is helpful, right, when you think about the body changing and some of the things that we're not able to do from a genital perspective, those that have a kink and fantasy perspective to their life are often very grateful, because it doesn't rely on the genitals cooperating at times. So if your partner says, I want to feel more in control, but I can't get an erection, or my vagina hurts too much, I can't do that. Well, there's still ways that you could be playful, and bondage these days goes from very, very playful sort of things to heavier kinds of things, depending on people's interests. But it could be as simply as using a necktie. It could be something and just enjoying that and enjoying the exchange of power that comes with that. But it's hard to get there if we don't know how we want to feel. What is it that I want to experience? And then the activities sort of drive into that. One other thing to that I would encourage you, an exercise you could do with your partner, is a sensory exercise. And this would be talking to each other about, hey, I'm going to give you these questions and I'd love to talk about it this weekend. When you go through your senses, what do you find sexy? What do you hear? Is it the rain on the windows that you like? What is it that you feel? Is it the silk on the sheets? What is it that you taste? And you kind of go through your senses and you say, what are those things? And for example, this morning, someone said, when I hear a motorcycle rev, right? So it doesn't have to be something that is inherently sexual. It could just be something that you find sexy. And so I would encourage you to talk to your partner. What are some of those things from a sensory perspective? So then if we say we want to spice it up a little bit, hey, I'm going to put the silk sheets on the bed. I'm going to play that rainmaker, noise machine that we have, and try to make it a little bit more fun and a little bit sexier, if we don't want to, go down the kink route or the fantasy route. So great question, super human. People always want to know, how do we spice it up? And so that's a great question. Thank you.
So I want to encourage people. We have about 15 minutes left to put your questions in the chat if you have them, and we'll try to get to everybody's questions. Another thing is medication. As people get older, excuse me, they tend to be on more medications. And are there certain medications that could be impacting people's sex lives, and what can they do about that?
Yeah, and that's something you want to talk to your doctor about. We know that SSRIs are a big killer. So when people have depression and anxiety and that sort of thing, a lot of the medications. So one of the things that doctors will not necessarily proactively ask a lot of times is, about your sex life and that sort of thing. And if they don't know that, they might assume that it's unimportant. So you really want to sort of say, hey, I'm sexually active and I want a medication for whatever ails me. I want something that's mindful of that I am still sexual and that I don't want something that's going to hurt that. So, antidepressants, SSRIs are the number one thing. When someone comes to me and talks about medication, that's the first thing we're looking for. Beyond that, heart failure medications are really important. That shows up. Blood pressure medications, H2 blockers. Some of the newer cancer treatments will do that as well. So this is really a question to have with your doctor of, are there side effects related to sexual performance, desire, that sort of thing that I want to be aware of? And if yes, are there any alternatives that you can think of that would make sense?
Okay, thank you. So we did receive a question earlier about my partner is still interested in sex, but I just don't feel the same way anymore. How do I handle that without hurting his feelings? And I know that I've heard from girlfriends that if they make a suggestion to their partner, that their partner reacts with like being insecure about it, as like a blow to their ego that they don't know what they're doing. So How do you handle those kind of conversations?
I think this gets into the rejection piece is what is really hurtful to a lot of relationships and people feeling rejected. And so I think it's having the open conversation and saying, when I don't have desire in some of these ways, how are other ways that we can connect? And one thing that people, when it comes to desire, not being interested in sex, I would encourage you to think about the delineation of two kinds of desire, right? We know about spontaneous desire and we know about responsive desire, right? And so spontaneous desire would be you see your partner and you're both so turned on and you engage in this eroticism. Everyone is turned on, everyone is excited, and sex just kind of happens, and whatever sex that is kind of happens, and the desire is just present, right? Responsive desire is far more typical and human for those in long-term relationships, in monogamous relationships. And that would be, hey, do you want to have sex? Well, gosh, not really, but maybe I would if we sat here for a little bit, if we listened to this music, if I let my nervous system relax a little bit. And so I would also encourage you to think about, am I aborting, if you will, too quickly by saying, I don't instantly feel that desire. I'm not really interested in sex right now. And are you making space for, what if I was to feel the warmth of my partner's body? What if we were to kiss slowly and explore each other with our hands? Would that create any source of arousal? And if the answer is no to both, then it's really talking about what are some of the ways that I could consensually and from a desirous perspective still engage with you. And that could be anything from using toys, that could be anything from using kink, that could be anything from reading eroticism together. There's lots of things like that. Masturbating, each other, watching your partner masturbate. So there's a lot of different ways that you can engage in that. The key in this is going to be really having the conversation and asking, how important is that? And kind of what is the point? Back to that sexual ethic. What is our why? Is this about orgasm? Is this about penetration? Is this just, we want to feel close? We want to feel deliberate and intentional. And so I would encourage you to really hang in those conversations and spend some time there.
Okay. All right. So from Loretta, she wants to know if you get questions about religion and how that affects a healthy sexual, intimate relationship.
I do. Yeah, it's a really common thing. And it's complex. I mean, there are some people that come from a shame perspective where they have felt so awful about, the messaging that they got and the way that they engage with that. There are people now that will talk about, do I need to have sex with my partner? And this, my familiarity is most with Christianity and Judaism. So I don't know as much about the other religions. Those are the ones that I tend to hear the most in my sessions, in my world. And I think that is something where I really encourage people to make sure that they're not taking a corrupted source, right? A lot of times when you hear about sexual trauma and things that have happened in churches or through religion and that sort of thing, I mean, these are people that are doing horrific things that have nothing to do with God or nothing to do with religion. These are just things that are done in that name. And so I think separating that out and talking to a religious leader about that in whatever denomination or sect that you believe in or drawn to, I think going to them and talking to them and sharing that is really important, so you can get really grounded information. I would not be on Reddit. I would not be on some of these things, because people are throwing out all kinds of stuff about that. And so religious trauma, religious shame is, I would say, probably second to desire discrepancy in terms of the things that people come and they want to talk about. And so I would really go to the source and go to someone that you trust in the religion that you're affiliated with, and share some of this and ask, what do we believe and what does our doctrine, say about this, and try to reconcile it that way.
Yeah, I can recall my mother telling me that I was raised Catholic, and that she was told, when you're done having children, you're done having sex. Sex was for procreation only. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably impacted so many people.
Sure.
So,
Yes.
okay, so we want to remind everyone that this program is recorded and it will be available to replay with the same link you used to join us. So again, if you have questions, we still have a few more minutes left. We do have, let me see, we have a question from Rhonda. Her question is about her husband who likes to smear his ejaculate on her body, and she doesn't like it, and has told him that herself. Any suggestions?
Yeah, that needs to be stopped immediately, right? And this has nothing to do with my particular kink or my particular fetish. Now we're talking about consent. And then there is a black and whiteness to this, right? This is not a, well, gosh, it's this or that. If I don't like it and I don't consent to it, you can't do it. And I'm not going to trust you, and I'm not going to engage in you in that way. And there needs to be a boundary set around that, where if you want to talk about this particular thing that you enjoy, then okay, and maybe I can navigate ways to do that. Maybe we do that in the shower. Maybe we do that in some way that feels a little bit better to me. But ultimately, if you don't have agency and autonomy, that is unhealthy, it is destructive, and it will create great psychological damage. And so I would say the answer to that is more clear cut than a lot of these questions, in that I would say it needs to stop, period, end of story, unless there is a change in that consent. No one should be participating in something, whether it's ejaculate on their body or kissing or anything, if they don't want it. And we really need to take a stand as sexual beings and as relational beings, and not tolerate non-consensual behavior.
Okay. I think this is the same person, but she's asking, what are some kissing techniques that are arousing?
Yeah, so there's an exercise that, it's funny when you meet people that have been together for 20 years, and I'll talk to them individually, and they'll say, oh my gosh, I can't stand the way my partner and I kiss. I hate it. And I say, well, have you told them? And they'll say, well, no, that would be weird. And so one of the things I'd encourage people to do is to do this kissing exercise, right? And what this is basically coming together and taking turns, right? So you come together with your partner, and you would take about 3 to 5 minutes, and your partner would be fully responsive to you, would sort of mirror you. So if you like to kiss on the neck, they're going to kiss you back on the neck. If you bite their ear, they're going to bite your ear. If you use a lot of tongue, they're going to use a lot of tongue. And the idea is, until you get into a rhythm and now your partner is mirroring the way that you want to kiss, then once you get to that place, then you stop and then you trade. And now you would be the responsive one mirroring your partner. And it's a great way to teach your partner, to show them, this is how I like to kiss. This is how I like to be kissed. And a lot of times people say, oh my gosh, I had no idea you liked to kiss like that. So this is one of those things that conversations can be helpful. But this is one that I would say, if you're comfortable with each other and kissing feels accessible, I would say, hey, let's do this kissing exercise and sort of see how this feels.
That would be a fun Friday night.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, so Roseanne, we have 2 questions back to back there about medications. I'll start with Roseanne's. She wants to know, are the medications that one takes secreted in semen or vaginal secretions? And is that dangerous during oral sex to the partner that doesn't take those meds?
And the answer to that, we would say, is no. Now, I will say this, I will put a big asterisk. I am not a medical doctor, and so I want to be careful. That would be a question that fringes on what I would feel comfortable answering, just because of it's that medication related. But I can tell you anecdotally and from what we've talked about in the trainings and those kinds of things that I've been to, the answer to that would be no. But I would always defer that to a medical doctor who has a greater expertise with medication side effects, or a pharmacist, than myself.
Okay. JB is asking if you can talk about erectile dysfunction drugs. Are they safe?
They're very safe, and that's something that has changed. And so, you want to talk to your doctor about any sort of changes to your health, your cardiovascular system and that sort of thing. But people have really great success with them. The majority of people that I work with now are using the low dose daily, which has really taken off, as opposed to the higher dosage kind of one-offs. There are a lot of people taking the daily Cialis and that sort of thing, really low dose. It doesn't require the planning and just doesn't put as much of the medication into your body at one time. So my experience has been, you will have some flushing for a lot of people. People experience a stuffiness in the nose. And that's because the nose is the only place other than your penis that has the spongy tissue that's affected. So as your penis gets harder, as you take Viagra, that it also floods the same material, the same tissue in your nose, which is why men will start sniffling or get really stuffy in their nose, because their nose is filling up with blood as well. But that's sort of a side effect that a lot of people can tolerate. But yeah, very, very safe and very widely used and adopted.
I know we're getting close. We have about 4 minutes and a couple more questions here. So SG is asking if there's anything to consider or be aware of about using estradiol cream.
Mm-hmm.
Gynecologist suggested this.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's something that we're talking about with menstrual cycles and that sort of thing. That's something that is very well tolerated. I haven't heard of a lot of issues with this. I mean, a lot of people that have used these creams really enjoy them, and I've heard good things. So anecdotally, in my experience, I have not heard many issues with it. I've not heard many people that have anything other than positive things to say. I think they tend to be pretty helpful.
Okay. And here's a question from Kat. In the same conversation as religion, if one is from a Baptist church who may feel that remarrying is adultery, and the other partner is Catholic and was taught that it's shameful to have unmarried sex, thus always, I don't know what that says, feeling sinful. I don't know. They're always feeling sinful. Any suggestions for this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this comes back to, I think, your relationship with God and what you believe, the doctrine that you have, and going to whoever is a trusted source in the faith that you subscribe to, and saying, hey, what do we do with this? What do we do with the shame? What do I do if I've done these things in the past, or if I'm doing this? What do we believe as a body, and what does that mean for me? And so I'd really encourage you, in religious leaders, they're very versed in these kinds of things. They're used to talking about it. And so I think that's a conversation, I think, to have as part of your own spiritual walk and your own journey, with whomever you trust in your religious body.
All right. Michael is asking, which is most effective, Cialis or Viagra? How much time does it take for the one-time use ones to work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really depends on the person. So there are some people that Cialis does absolutely nothing for. There are some people that say, I tried Viagra and I'm despondent, it didn't do anything. Then they take Cialis and have the best direction of their lives. And I'm not sure we know why, but they just tend to respond to different bodies and body chemistries differently. The one-time use usually takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So there's a bit of timing involved with that. That's with Viagra. The Cialis is a little bit faster, and they used to call Cialis the weekend pill because it lasts a little bit longer. The one-time dose would last about 48 hours. And so they would call it the weekender or the weekend pill, whereas Viagra is probably going to be closer to 6 to 8 hours of real efficacy. But you're going to have a little bit of planning. Typically with Viagra, I think we'd say probably about an hour and a half, hour to 2 hours lead time to really be at the full efficacy of the medication.
Okay, thank you. I believe we're out of time. I want to thank Jason Powell for his expertise in joining us. As I mentioned, the Ask the Doc series is happening every month through May. The next one up is on March 28th, and that's how to navigate the heavy lift of caring for a loved one. On April 25th, we're going to be talking about the truth behind cannabis in healthcare. And then we're going to wrap things up on May 29th when we talk about dementia care. These are all free events where you get to ask the expert your questions, and the link is in the chat, or is in the chat, so feel free to use that. Thank you, Jason, and thank you to our audience for attending. We'll see you next month.